Welcome back. This is Face the Nation. Let's start off the third round with Professor Rohan Samarjiva. Professor, in the second round, you said the machinery is not firing enough. You said in the year 2001, the UNP fared well enough compared to what they're faring right now. However, we had a similar situation even back then. We had Chandrika Bandaranaike Kumaratunga as the president of the country from a different political party, and you had Ranil Wickremesinghe representing a different political party. Even now, we have a similar situation. What is the problem right now? Is it the coalition government that is keeping the UNP back?
No, we could say that the political situation is better because there the two were at cross purposes. Here they are aligned, and the president is explaining, justifying the economic decisions taken by the UNP and so on, and he's being very helpful. But somehow, I mean, if you really think in those terms of the 9 months and 17 months, the term that was used earlier. So what had the UNP, I mean the petroleum distribution sector was being reformed, IOC had come in, the telecommunications IPO, which is a big signal, it was a communication. We had tried to do the SLT IPO twice before and failed. And the third time it succeeded in December of 2002. That was, I would say, about what, 13 months in, and it took a lot of work to get the ducks lined up to do that. The international gateway liberalization was announced in August. So there was a whole series of things. The A9 was being built during that period, and people were beginning to travel on the A9 from Jaffna. So somehow there was more, the engine was firing at that time. Somehow this time, I mean, I was willing to excuse the government during the 100 days or extended 100 days period. I said, okay, we got other priorities. It's constitutional moment. We need to focus on the 19th Amendment and the 20th. But that's why I brought up the ceasefire. That was a very delicate negotiation that involved multiple rounds of discussion. While that was going on, the economic decisions were being taken, actions were being taken, the airport modernization decisions were being taken. Somehow that is missing this time.
Is the government genuinely interested about improving the country's economy, or are they trying to fill up their own pockets? We had the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce former chairman issuing a statement saying that the last 5 bond issues need to be investigated. What is going on?
The UNP's value proposition is that they are good managers of the economy. They took an economy that was negative and they straightened it out in 2001, 2002. So if they lose their value proposition, what chance do they have in the coming election?
But
I don't think they can afford to neglect the economy like this.
But they lost elections in the year 2005.
Yeah, but still, people in the back of their minds, they knew these guys are better at managing the economy than the alternative. And you again, I mean, we are talking about a transition, right? At that moment, I can remember the people in Treasury, the team that was at the top, there was a lot of turmoil, right? There's a little bit of...
You said the policies are shifting, Professor Rohan Samarjiva.
Policies are pretty...
And then you're saying you're optimistic that they will put it right. Is that what you're trying to say?
You live in a country, you got to be optimistic. Can you actually live in a country without being optimistic? I mean, can you psychologically survive the experience? I lived through the war. I came to Sri Lanka during the war when, all hell was breaking loose, buildings were being bombed. And I was still optimistic. I'm always optimistic.
Mustn't stakeholders like you pressurize the government, put them on the right track?
Read my writing. Read my lips. I have called them on what has to be called. Right now I'm criticizing them on the unreasonable taxes being levied on telecommunication. For every 100 rupees that we are spending, we have to spend 50 rupees in taxes. I'm saying shut down the ICT agency. You don't need to promote an activity that you seem to be treating like tobacco or alcohol. Right? So what has to be criticized, I do criticize. But I'm saying one has to have a positive outlook. I have to admit that overall the international climate has improved. That is, I think, one reason why the fisheries ban was able to be lifted. That is why swaps with India have gone through. There is a lot of goodwill that has been built up. Let's give the people the credit for that. But for us to say, we need to do more.
Thank you very much, Professor Rohan Samarjiva, for your thoughts. And now move on to Anushka Vijayasinghe, Chief Economist of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. Anushka, Mrs. Rusipal Tendikon said, when an investor comes into the country, when you realize that the goalpost is shifting every night, it's difficult to invest. What do you think the government should do to put the policies right on track and invest and attract investors to the country?
First and foremost, stop moving the goalposts. Stop doing it overnight, stop doing it over a week, stop doing it every few months, and then moving it back together again. Just keep policy predictable. And I think, I mean, we can't live in a utopia where we think everything, all economic policies will be lined up beautifully, where everyone knows exactly what's going on. That won't happen. That rarely happens in developed countries, and we can't expect that. But at the very least, I think policy consistency on tax rates, on when taxes are going to be introduced, the date, the official starting date. We saw that with the VAT and other taxes, shifting dates. We saw different messages coming from different institutions and individuals. We saw as private sector companies who would speak to these institutions not able to get clarity on really what's going on. We saw on the capital gains tax. Now the capital gains tax is a big it's a big signal that you send to foreign investors. If you are going ahead with the capital gains tax and the Prime Minister announced it, then I think we should have followed through with it. Say, we know it's not great, we know that Sri Lanka may benefit from not having it, but we are going ahead for these reasons. We're going to start drafting the legislation. It's gone to legal draftsmen. We're going to have consultations. And that gives some predictability. Yes, it's not great that we may be imposing this. Country needs tax revenue, so okay, fine, tell us the pathway. But up to now, we don't know whether it's even going ahead or not. And we've been told that it's been postponed for about 6 months and we'll wait and see. Now that's not good at all. And this is where we're shooting ourselves in the foot, because like I said, there are investors who are very optimistic. My optimism comes from speaking to some of them who see the value proposition in Sri Lanka. But little things like putting little things straight, like policy consistency, predictability, very clear statements on what will and will not be done, I think those are little things, and that's not asking for a lot.
Anushka, who is in charge of the country's economy? Is it the President, the Prime Minister, the Minister of Finance, or is it the General Secretary of the United National Party?
Well, who's in charge? I think there are different parts of the government are in charge of different things. Who's messaging on the economy? It seems to be too many people.
Who is messing the country's
messaging,
economy?
communications,
Who is messing the country's economy?
messaging on, you know, tax changes or policy, what the government.
I do understand. My question to you is, who is messing the country's economy? You say the policy is shifting. If that is the case, who is messing with the country's economy?
I think we have a great many people who've been involved in the policy flip-flops, and I would say it's those policy flip-flops and the inconsistency is what's messing the country. And I think your audience would know who different messengers are, who the different parties are who are giving mixed messages.
Thank you very much, Anushka, for your thoughts in the third round. I now move on to Mr. Rusipal Tendikon. Mr. Rusipal Tendikon, who is messing the country's economy?
Well, I think the answer to that should come from a more authenticated body. I think the IMF and the World Bank is the best to answer that situation. You know, analyzing the first 100-day budget situation, the World Bank has made a comment in their report, IMF, the last team, saying that the one-off taxes and the taxation that they introduced, giving tax holidays and sort of making it appear as if everything is okay, we can extend any facility like, it was totally wrong and irrelevant and not correct. That they have very clearly said. And the consumerism that the professor mentioned, all that emanated from that policy. Where did the money come from? If the country did not have anything, where did these imports, who financed those imports? Where did the money come from? You know, these one-off taxes, these short-term policies with no vision has spoiled the situation. So therefore, what is the base reason for this whole mess is that the economy is not managed properly. And that has been very clearly stated by the authorities such as the IMF.
Mr. Tendakon, we had the tax on telecommunication increasing, we had the VAT increasing by 3%, going up to 15%, we had the nation building tax being reintroduced to 2%. Are we acting based on the women fancy of the International Monetary Fund?
I don't think so. That's another misnomer. I don't think there is anywhere the World Bank has given or dictated, to say that you increase this tax or you increase that tax. What they have been telling right throughout is to have consistency in the taxing policy and have a proper tax policy. The problem is when people are not capable of introducing a proper tax mechanism, they resort to such short-term, very short-lived policies such as increasing the VAT, increasing the taxes on the telephones, telecommunications and things like that. That is what has happened. Total lack of ability to manage the economy and leaving the handling of the economy in the hands of such people has made it a mess.
So this is it. 15% VAT, nation building tax at 2%, taxes on telecommunication increasing, and this is it.
Yes.
Taxes won't be increased hereafter, at least until the end of the year 2012. 2016, will the people have to tighten their belts any further in the future?
We never know what will happen, because if this is not going to be sufficient, because we don't see any income generation plans in this. We have to supplement the country's economy by income generation plans. We have to invite foreign investment. We have to promote foreign investment. We have to improve the labor forces in this country to increase productivity. Nothing of the sort is seen. By merely increasing the taxes, we are once again on a very short-lived path.
Mr. Tendakon, before I move on to Colonel Channa Veeratunga, the governor of the central bank a few months ago said that the government will not go to the IMF with a begging bowl. Have you gone to the IMF with a begging bowl?
I think that the team that went to the IMF included the governor of the central bank also. From the information that we have, they have totally failed in their mission to convince the World Bank that without resorting to this type of taxation, they are able to put the economy back into correct path. They have totally failed. And this governor of the central bank is a total misfit to this country. He has been imported by the government and he has been put to the wrong place, and it is a wrong person in the wrong place. He should have been some kind of an advisor to somebody if they really wanted invited advice or imported advice. In that capacity, he would have served better, but not as the governor of the central bank.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rusirpal Tendakon, for your thoughts in the third round. I now move on to retired Colonel Channa Veeratunga, spokesperson of the Seafood Export Association of Sri Lanka. Colonel Veeratunga, you said that the government has a political will, but there are problems. What are these problems that you're referring to? Bureaucracy? What exactly is it?
Well, Shami, as I understand, the government has a political will. With regard to my area of the subject, but it is not sufficient to make things happen. For example, there are ministries, line ministries who are involved in the fishery, the departments that are coming under the fishery, the related departments in other ministries. So even right now there are conflicting regulations that are in force to curtail the exports or imports for the purpose of export. Sri Lanka is a small country. We have to import for the purpose of export. Now, if for some reason it is confused with the imports for the consumption, and there are laws or regulations related to imports for the consumption which automatically applicable to imports for the export, then it's a hindrance. Then it's stopping the exports.
The seafood that we eat right now, Majority of them come from where? Is it through farming or other means?
Seafood in Sri Lanka mainly from the wild catch.
From the
We
wild
do
catch.
very little, yes, except for shrimp, which is growing to a certain extent, little by little, mainly the wild catch.
Let's take the world for an example, Colonel. Through what? Wild catch or farming?
In 2012, I learned it is about 50% from farming. That is the fish protein coming to the plate of the entire world. This year, in 2016, when I went to Iran, I learned it is about 58%. You can see the growth of farming, and what that does mean. It means the wild catch is reducing.
So the Sri Lankan exports stands at the wild catch of 42%, or is it a fraction of that?
Well, it's a fraction of that, because we do very little of our exports. When the ban was imposed, our exports were about 18,000 metric tons out of 500,000 metric tons catch.
Now you say the government have a policy. Does the government really have a policy? Are we going to depend on the wild catch, or are we going to farm and ensure that we increase our exports in the future?
They have a clear policy of increase the exports. They are setting the ground situation.
But they don't know how to do it.
Well, it has to be done by the line ministries and the departments and related institutes
Are they
like
doing
private
it?
sector. Well, that has to be discussed.
Thank you very much, Colonel Channa Viratunga, spokesperson of the Seafood Exporters Association of Sri Lanka. I open the floor once again for questions from our journalists. Let's start off with Faraz again.
Thank you. Let's go for Anushka then. Sorry. Anushka, Professor was saying that about the VAT, and I think the whole country is saying about it. What's the alternative? What can the government do if they are not to raise the VAT like that?
So for us, I think the ideal alternative is that we move away from these entity or sector-based taxes, ad hoc rate changes that people, don't see coming, and really move to more broad-based taxation, where broad-based in the sense where we tax more things, we have fewer exemptions where there are all kinds of loopholes, fewer tax holidays, and more targeted tax incentives, taxing more people, and particularly depending less on taxes like VAT, NBT and others, which are indirect taxes. Indirect taxes hurt whether it's me or you or a super wealthy person or a super poor person. It affects them all the same. Whereas income taxes, richer people pay more, richer companies pay more. We need to get better at taxing direct taxes, and that's where we have not done well, where it's very few companies and individuals that are in the tax net. So when I mean broad basing, it's about getting more people to pay tax, and this is something that an agenda that has been neglected for years, almost decades, and now it's coming to bite us because we don't have the free easy donor money that we did before. We have to depend on taxes. More than we did before for our own revenue.
But I get a word in there.
Yeah.
I have no objection whatsoever to telecommunications being subjected to value-added taxes. When I was Director General, people came to me asking me to, I can't remember what the BTT or whatever it was, to be exempted. I said nothing of the sort. I believe that this should be applied. The issue is that there was a quid pro quo. It was removed and a 20% or 25% levy was put instead few years back. Now what you got is what is removed, what is the substitute, plus VAT is coming in both at the same time, which is why you're getting this absurd rate of 50 rupees for every 100 you spend.
So, just getting back to you, Anushka, when you say, would this mean removing all these almost silly concessions that are given to public servants, members of parliament, in terms of their freebie imports of cars and so on?
So for us, I think you're asking ordinary people to pay more for their private medical care, more for their mobile phones, which are now increasingly becoming essential. They're not luxuries. If you're asking ordinary people to do that and tighten their belts, I think it's only fair that we stop the generosity with which we give concessions to public servants on the duty-free vehicles.
Mr. Anurukumara Dissanayake pointed out on the 5th of May in Parliament that they're asking for more money to spend an absolute fortune on the Prime Minister's transport fleet. Is that sort of...
I think for us, these across the board, and whether it is the Prime Minister's budget or an MP's budget or an institution's budget, public institution's budget, across the board we have to go with a magnifying glass to see where public money is being spent. Because again, if we're asking people to pay more tax, whether it's VAT or income taxes going up, or if you're asking people who weren't in the tax net, companies that were operating below the radar to formalize and pay tax, they're going to want to know where their money is going. And would companies and individuals want to pay more tax, want to comply with tax, declare the right income, if their money is being wasted on a loss-making airline, on inefficient public services, on bloated institutions, on generous vehicle allowances for MPs? I don't think so. So until we fix that, I think it's very difficult for people to bear raising taxes, but that doesn't mean it shouldn't happen. That's the situation we're in right now. But these two have to come together, because around the world, what we've seen is countries where you're better at managing where the money goes, where the money is spent. People are more willing to pay tax. Compliance rates are higher. So I think if we're going to a more broad-based tax regime where more people are encouraged to pay tax, we also have to get really serious about where tax money is going.
The finance minister told us a couple of weeks ago that there were only 442,000 pay-as-you-earn files, and out of that, he said it didn't mean that they all paid. So there's obviously a compliance issue.
Absolutely for us. And those, at least payee tax is easier to monitor, because you have employees registered with companies. You can find out on the payroll who's there, is the company remitting their payee tax. What's harder, and where we're collecting even less tax, is at the enterprise level. And that's really difficult when you go and impose a 60,000 rupee registration fee for small businesses. That's crippling. And you also tell them, if you're shutting down, you have to pay 250,000 rupees. If I'm a small business owner who is operating under the radar, those kind of levies are not going to make me any more willing to formalize and pay taxes and so on. 93% of our enterprises are micro businesses, below 5 employees. We need to make sure that they are given the climate to come and formalize, to register, and then pay taxes. And on that we really don't collect taxes broadly from enterprises, and we need to make it easier, and these levies don't make it easier to formalize.
Mr. Tennakoon, you would agree with me if I told you that politics and economics go hand in hand. What is the role of the finance ministry when it comes to the economy of the country?
Well, I think from the little that we know and the experience we have had in the political history in this country, it is the finance minister to whom we look up to, for the management of the economy, and for the forecasting of the economy, and for the control of the economy. That is the role that we expect from Minister of Finance.
The shifting of goals that you spoke about, the economic policy flip-flops that you and Professor spoke about, who is responsible for these then?
I think that, in my own opinion, I think that depends on this whole aberrated system where there are too many people doing too many things in one field.
Let me funnel down the question. Is the Minister of Finance and the State Minister of Finance doing what they're supposed to do?
I think they are doing what they are supposed to do, but whether they have been put into the right place to do the right thing is the question.
So these ad hoc decisions that you were speaking about, this instability in the economic system, is a result of who?
It's certainly a result originating from the policymakers. from the Prime Minister downwards, whoever is responsible to grant them the authorities to appoint the people, to put the people into the right place, to divide the functions among them in a proper way. I mean, those people are responsible.
Anushka, when a political analyst and a senior banker is seated next to you, and he's unable to give a clear directive as to what the situation of the economy when it comes to the finance minister is, you're still optimistic that you would invest in a country like Sri Lanka?
Absolutely, because I would be a smart investor that's not going to look beyond 1 or 2 years. I would be a smart investor who looks at Sri Lanka's potential. You get in now into a country that has this potential, has this kind of location, has this kind of linkages to key markets. You get in now and you're set. And I think that's what investors are seeing. But certainly that doesn't translate into immediate investments, and of course there are folks who are turned off by this. And like I said again, it won't take much to turn them back, and won't take much to translate their excitement and optimism into real investments. It won't take much. All it'll take is to get the communication right, get the policy consistency right, get rid of the flip-flops, and really send out a clear and consistent message.
Do you think the current One more question. Do you think the current government and the ministry and the relevant authorities can show this positive sign to get investors? You are representing the Chamber of Commerce. So do you think that they can in fact show something that is promising to these investors and get their attention back to the country?
I think the investors who are coming are seeing the opportunity on their own. They're smart guys. They are doing the due diligence. They can see what's smart. But of course, can the government then further, push them to make that decision, show them that it's consistent? I think they can. It's a question of
why they're not doing it?
Whether they'll be able to do it in a way that satisfies investors.
Then there is this group, those who want to fish in troubled waters are also coming in.
So your savvy early bird investor would also need a healthy dose of confidence in our legislators. The same people who change their minds week in, week out. The nighttime gazettes, as Mr. Rusiripala pointed out, and the inconsistent policies. So they would not only be savvy to be early bird investors, but they'd also need to have a whole load of optimism and confidence in our legislators.
I mean, for us, if many of these things at least go through a proper process where the legislators are actually involved in it, or they actually know what's going on, if some of these things come to Parliament, maybe that might even improve decision making because you have so many more people. The problem what we're seeing now is it's very ad hoc. Recently, the new regulations around repatriating export proceeds, very restrictive, going back to 1993. That doesn't send a good signal at all to investors that we are a country progressing, that we are moving forward, that we are opening up. And that was done with little to no consultation with the private sector. And I'm not sure how many legislators knew that something like that was coming. So again, my point is that it's happening very ad hoc, where it's either some individuals, a few entities based on limited information, not looking at the different linkages, and that's not modern policymaking.
Perhaps it's restrictive because they all know that there's something called Mossack Fonseca and Panama Papers.
Yes, Professor. Go ahead.
Yeah. I'm a little concerned about bringing the entire legislature in. We have a cabinet form of government. That's what our form of government is. We also have a kind of historical memory of presidents being in charge of everything. Even though after the 19th Amendment, the president is not in charge of everything. But we have a memory of that, and we want him to be in charge of everything. One of the good things that I see is there's a coordination between the president and the prime minister and the finance minister that has been recently announced. Because otherwise I think he was getting surprised by some of these announcements and then having to justify them and explain them. So maybe, these people are finding their way. I don't know whether this particular mechanism will work, but those kinds of mechanisms. There's always an economic policy subcommittee of cabinet.
Anushka,
that should be involved.
Professor Samarjiva, talking about coordination between the
Prime Minister, the President and the Finance Minister, perhaps there should be some level of coordination between the Foreign Minister and the Prime Minister as well. You were talking about GSP Plus earlier. We've agreed to a list of 58, if I'm not mistaken, conditions that the Foreign Ministry has agreed to, and or according, if reports are to be believed, the Prime Minister is furious about. There's something that worries me here. One of the government's key selling points in marketing itself has been, we've got friendly relations all across the world now with the United States, with the European Union, specifically with the Western world. But then I look back at the conditions that were set by the EU to the previous regime when GSP Plus was up for renewal. The conditions now are far more stringent.
Well,
is this a foreign policy failure?
Well, we first have to accept one thing, which is when you're in a club and they're trying to throw you out, the conditions are somewhat less rigorous. Now you've been thrown out and you're trying to get in, the conditions will be more rigorous. But 58, I looked at that list and I said this won't happen. So I would say that by giving the 58, is the European Union saying no? By accepting, I don't even know whether this were accepted, it's for negotiation, right? Has our foreign minister been asleep at the switch? These were things that had to be very carefully managed because, if you look at the low-hanging fruit, the low-hanging fruit were the Indian trade agreement and GSP Plus. China, we had just done the study and we were in very early stages. So those were the three. But if this is going to slip through our fingers, I'm afraid we are in trouble.
Anushka, I have this question.
Just give a second. Yes, Anushka.
On GSP Plus, I think Professor Samarjiva makes a valid point. So GSP Plus, the plus part means that we have to do a bit more to get it, and there are things that make you be eligible for the plus, GSP Plus. Otherwise, we can have GSP the same way we have it with the US. Now, the thing is, in 2010 when it was removed, we had about 15 items that we were quote-unquote violating, and that's why it was removed from us. Since then, there have been about another further 15 items that again are not favorable, are not what the EU accepts. So now I think out of those, say about 30, these 50 are actually actions rather than conditions, from what I understand, and I think we need more clarity from the finance minister, from the foreign minister, everyone involved in this, what this really means. But from what I understand, these are 50 plus actions for about 30 areas that we are not compliant to,
so
and we don't need to
specifically.
It was always that, and you have to understand that. Maybe I don't agree with all of the actions, but these are we signed up to it when we got GSP Plus the first time. We said, okay, we are okay with your rules, and then we went and broke some of them. So it's natural that the person we got the concession from is saying, hey, you're not playing by the rules. Even now, it's up to us how much of those actions we are going to do or not, how much we can negotiate and say, okay, we can show progress, because from what we hear,
how crucial is GSP Plus for Sri Lanka, really?
It's crucial. It's crucial.
How crucial?
And not just for our garment industry. I don't have the export number right now, but the garment industry was particularly hit, and we often only talked about the garments, but there were in toy manufacturing, in porcelain tableware, in gloves.
Look at it from a perspective of free market economics. Does that mean that our garment sector, our apparel sector, is not competitive, does not have a competitive advantage when it comes to trading apparel, and therefore we should be directing those resources elsewhere?
If you take any circumstance, if you get an added advantage to what you already have, you'd want to take it. If there's something that makes you a little bit cheaper in that market, a little bit more competitive than something coming from Vietnam, your competitors have different market access.
Competitors have GSP Plus, that's the problem.
And Bangladesh has EBA, everything but arms, which is even beyond GSP Plus. The fact is, we need whatever it takes to compete, and this gives us an added edge. So
thank you very much, Anushka, for your thoughts in the fourth round. We're now going for a short commercial break. When we come back, it's the final round. This is Face the Nation, and our topic of discussion is the state of the country's economy. Welcome back. This is Face the Nation, the final round. We start off the final round with Professor Rohan Samarjiva, founding chair of Learn Asia. Professor Samarjiva, you said that, look at my writing. You somewhat said that you have been very critical of the government as well. Look at my writing. Is the government taking individuals like you seriously, or are they just ducking the bouncers that you bowl?
Well, on some things like the Right to Information Act, I mean, I can recall there was one draft where they had language which said all entities created under any statute which should have brought all the companies in the country within the scope of the Right to Information Act, which should have been a complete nightmare, right? When that was pointed out in my writing, now the act is very clear, Companies Act exempted. So I do believe that the public discussions that we are having are meaningful.
They are listening.
Do
to
I
you.
expect everything that I say to be taken as, you know, edicts from some god or something? I'm not God. I'm just a guy. So I expect. I mean, I'm happy when 1/3 of them are accepted and 2/3 of them are modified. Somebody takes ownership of it. I'm happy. So I think there is a public discussion going on. Ideas are being presented and people are acting on them. More would be nice.
What is your take about the country's future? Does the government have a plan? Do they know where they're heading?
When I was asked by some Chinese entrepreneurs and Chinese intellectuals, they are completely flustered by what is going on here. I said, look, we have a democratic culture. This is the way we do things. We don't do things the way you do things, which is to have one party that has been in power from 1949 that takes hard decisions. This is the way we do things, but this is somewhat stable. We are in a particular constitutional moment. I think we need to finish the constitutional job. We need to deal with maybe not a new constitution, but at least the 13th Amendment and the 20th Amendment. I think we need to address these things. So once we get that done, but we can't wait. We can't wait to finish the constitution and then do the economics. We got to run on parallel tracks. But this coming together of the two parties is a special opportunity. We need to do some things at this time.
Professor, you apparently told the Chinese that this is the way we do things, and this is the democracy in Sri Lanka, and the policies are somewhat stable. However, earlier you said the policies are very inconsistent.
Somewhat.
You said somewhat stable. That's what you said
You
just now.
can never get the kind of certainty. I mean, that's what I was laughing about Vietnam. You can never get that kind of certainty in countries with democratic governing systems. The consultants that I deal with, they say, oh, it's so easy to do business in Dubai. Because you go, you talk to somebody in the ruling family and it's done. Vietnam is the same. Cambodia is the same. So we have to accept that we have put our faith in democracy. That means we are going to get a little bit of turbulence. My problem in our democracy is that nobody in opposition thinks they're going to be in government. They don't prepare to be in government. They don't have the plans. They don't have a shadow cabinet. They don't have plans ready to be implemented when they come into power. That's why they're flailing around for the first few months. People in government think they're going to be in government forever. They don't think they're going to be in opposition. So they behave in a very obnoxious manner while they're in government. So if we can get these two problems fixed, which other democracies have fixed, I think we could have a workable democracy. Right now we have a problem.
Or they think that they're still in the opposition
That
while
also
serving
is
in government.
possible. But I mean, they didn't prepare. We don't have a tradition of shadow cabinets. A consistent person building up expertise in transportation or finance or whatever. When you hear that, when you get that, you get a real sense of consistency. Now we have people just ranting whenever they feel like when they're in opposition, and then they come into government and they're flailing around.
Thank you very much, Professor Rohan Samarjiva, for your thoughts. Is the government really answering and listening to you? Again, a question that I pose to those at home. Anushka, how autocratic is this government?
I don't think it's very autocratic at all, which is why, as Professor Samarjiva said, it's noisy. Different people have their views. Different MPs are talking about the economy when it's not even their subject area. You have different institutions.
And then you have the Prime Minister saying, do not talk about things that you are not supposed to talk about. And that is not autocratic.
Well, I'd rather have the people who have the authority to talk about the economy talking about it consistently and giving the right message, and those who are in other ministries on not the economy or not finance talking about, you know, what's in their area of expertise. But I think, to answer your question, I don't think it's autocratic, and I don't think decision making has been particularly autocratic, at least from the point of view of the private sector. But of course, there are ad hoc decisions that are made that in some areas the private sector has not been consulted. But I must say this, that over the last 1.5 years, there's been a huge increase in interest and dialogue with groups like ours. Interest in listening to the private sector, interest in meeting us once a week, interest in solving private sector issues, not just going ahead. But the translation of that interest, that genuine willingness to then consistent policy that will put the country on the right track, I think that's where the gap is right now.
Corruption within the present regime, is that a concern to the private sector?
And the private sector is always concerned about corruption, but then you have certain corruption and uncertain corruption. I think the private sector has always had to deal with certain corruption. You have to pay unofficial payments to get things done. I mean, it's inefficiency in the system. Uncertain corruption is when you don't know whether one person will say one amount today, another person either in a family or a friend would come and tell you another price the day after, and still your project doesn't go ahead. I think we'll have to wait and see, because the proof will be in whether investors come. If investors come with this current context, it means that they are okay with whatever level of corruption we have now.
Corruption within the central bank, does that concern the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce?
I don't think the Ceylon Chamber has had an opinion on it, because we are not experts on the corruption. We've read the reports of the bond issue and so on, and we'll continue to look at it. But we keep saying
we'll continue to read and not do anything
because
about it.
all we can do is see what the investigations come about. And one thing we've said is that transparency is important. We were part of the March movement to nominate uncorrupt politicians for the election. This was last year. We were part of the anti-corruption movement. But listen, it's tricky. I mean, these issues are entrenched. You have private sector companies that benefited from corruption. You had politicians who leached on private companies and the private sector. These things can't be fixed overnight. But I think when you have a new constitutional process, you have better rules, we get to a better place. But I'm realistic about
you just mentioned that investigations are continuing. Is it so? Is investigations taking place?
Well, I hope it will. I don't know if it is or not, but I think there's a big question in people's minds about what happened, and there are big questions in people's minds about what continues to happen with bond sales and so on. We don't know. We don't know what the details are. We are not privy to those investigations. But of course, like any citizen, we are very keen to know, did something go wrong or not? Was something illegal? Was it something illegal or not? And I think we are very interested, and I hope we get some clarity on those.
Thank you very much, Anushka Vijayasinghe, Chief Economist of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. I now move on to retired Colonel Channa Veeratunga, spokesperson of the Seafood Exporters Association. Retired Colonel Veeratunga, you served the military.
Yes.
We have seen the end of the war for the last 7 years now. Where do you see the country heading by the end of 2016? Are you optimistic as the other two speakers, Anushka and Professor Rohan Samarjiva, and you have Mr. Risripal Tendakon seated right onto your right, thinking about the future of the country? Are you bullish as the two gentlemen on your far right?
Of course, Shami, I am optimistic. I think a lot of businessmen, investors are optimistic. Why? Sri Lanka is the best country. We have 3 times the requirement of the water of the island. I think if you want to do, if you have the will to do, you can. And we are a unique country where we are transforming and identifying, refining laws, regulations, the procedures, management measures, and the private sector and the investors in the country are powerful enough to negotiate with the government and come to favorable terms in their areas of interest. That's the uniqueness of this country. You can't do that in a European country. The terms and conditions, regulations, laws are all set. It will only be stringent more or further, which will make things more difficult. In Sri Lanka it is not the case. As of today, we can negotiate in the sector that I represent. We have the power to negotiate with the government of the terms that we want to adhere to. That's the uniqueness that I see, and that's what I see. It's a reason to be optimistic.
Is the government fishing in dangerous waters right now?
Well, fishing in dangerous waters. Fishing is always in the dangerous waters. Otherwise you don't find fish. The skill, the will to do will decide the success.
Is the government taking calculated risks?
Well, anything is a calculated risk. If you don't take a calculated risk, it's a problem. You have to take a calculated risk everywhere.
So you mean to say the government is testing the waters right now?
As far as we are concerned, government is doing well. There are issues down the line. We are negotiating with the government to rectify them, correct it, to refine them, negotiating with the people underneath, getting involved in the process. The biggest success that we have right now here is where we are involved in making laws, regulations, procedures, management measures, especially in the field that I represent. We are contributing to making laws. We were involved in the process, cumbersome, painful process of lifting the ban for 1.5 years. So that is what we see. There is a reason to be optimistic.
Thank you very much, retired Colonel Channa Veeratunga, spokesperson of the Seafood Exporters Association. I now move on to Mr. Risripala Tennakone, senior banker. Mr. Tennakone, you seem to be the minority here, by the way. You have two gentlemen on your right who are very optimistic about the future of Sri Lanka, and then you have another gentleman on your left who also believes so. Now, do not tell me that you changed your opinion by sitting here for the last 1.5 hours. What are your thoughts about the country's future?
Well, my concern is how serious are the policymakers and how serious are the people in the country looking up to the policymakers. Now we have ministers at the level of ministers who are telling, well, you are going to go in a Volkswagen car manufactured in this country in 1 or 2 months' time. The land has been allocated, money has been already separated for that thing. Investment is coming, and we are going to have a car manufacturing plant giving so many employment opportunities. Nothing has come about. The same minister telling, in 2 months' time we are going to get the fish ban import to Europe removed. We are waiting for the 18th month, nothing happening. We are waiting it to happen. Then they have been talking more than 10 times the lifting of the GSP ban. GSP ban, 3 months ago we got somebody coming from European Union stating here in this country, reported in the papers in Sri Lanka, even the application for the restoration has not been made by the government of Sri Lanka. And the ministers in this country go on stating that the GSP will be lifted, we will have a very improved garment industry, creating so many employment opportunities. We have a Prime Minister who is talking about making a megapolis city in the country, making the largest city in the Asian region you know, when there is no semblance of any availability of funding or any planning in that direction, then I mean, so many such things. Then we have a finance minister who is talking about 2 billion coming from an investor unknown, whom he is not prepared to name, and that money is going to relieve us in a big way of our financial burdens. And we are getting news from various parts of the world that this so-called investor of the $2 billion is a man who is looking to transport or shift some money, not through the SWIFT system, but through some backdoor system into an Asian country. Now, can we rely on this seriousness as people in this country? You answer that question, please, and make me understand whether I should agree with the rest of the gentlemen or whether I should confine myself to my thinking.
Unfortunately, I would love to answer that question, but I am not in that position now. But closed doors, I would definitely answer your question. But I would pose that question to Professor Rohan Samarjeva before we wrap up. Optimism, how serious is this government?
This is our country. This is a government that has got a historical mission to straighten out our governance system. I hope they won't screw up the economy. I would say that some kind of significant action, like I used an example before, getting the IPO, the initial public offering of one of the largest state-owned companies in 2002 was a very good signal to the investors, to the entire business community. I think we have a similar signal that we can do. The underperforming and the Expropriation Act that they push through,
Unutilized Assets Act,
unutilized, publicly abolish that act, make a big deal about it. That's a signal, a clear signal that the government is on the right path. Use the electricity crisis. Do something concrete about the Sri Lankan Airlines problem. Without just dragging on and on, do something so that we have propaganda of the deed. And people get a good signal. Because what are we going to do? We need to move on.
Thank you very much, Professor Rohan Samarjeva. I hope, Mr. Nakon, you got the answer for that, but I'm not going to give you any more time to respond to that. Thank you very much.
5 seconds.
Thank you very much, Professor Rohan Samarjeva, founding chair of Learn Asia. Thank you very much, Anushka Vijayasinghe, chief economist of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. Anushka, you should be the brand ambassador of Sri Lanka in terms of selling the country to the world. I hope and pray that you were involved in the March conclave that was organized by the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. Were you?
Yes.
So good job as far as branding Sri Lanka to the world is concerned. Also, Mr. Rusripal Thanakon, Senior Bank, for joining us this evening, and also retired Colonel Channa Veeratunga, spokesperson of the Seafood Exporters Association of Sri Lanka, for joining us this evening. Thank you very much, Nadim. Thank you very much, Chaturanga. For us, you've been very talkative today. Thank you very much for joining us this
All the
evening.
friends will lose their jobs if you had to save Sri Lankan Airlines.
Thank you very much, Faraz, for your final thoughts as well. What is important to understand is the fact that this evening is going to be quite significant. The Panama Papers are going to be out. We would know who the Sri Lankan dealers, the Sri Lankan stakeholders, the Sri Lankan business establishments who have been involved in this. And Newsfirst, of course, will bring you details of that tomorrow on our prime time news bulletins. If it's known that any Sri Lankans are involved in this scam. Thank you very much again, gentlemen, for joining us this evening. Thank you very much again, gentlemen. I leave you tonight with a quote. The world is governed by institutions that are not democratic. The WTO, which is the World Trade Organization, the World Bank, and the International Monetary Fund. Take care and good night.